coming this fall. An MGM production. A story of survival.
Jurassic Base, this is Jim. Are you receiving? Over. They're coming. I say again. Oh my God, they're coming!
A story of hope.
Let's get one thing straight, Slick. I'm your mechanic, right? Then let me do my job.
A tale of a mother's love.
My son, it's time you knew the truth.
Shh, rest now, Mum. Rest now, it doesn't matter.
I'm old, and this has weighed heavily upon my heart. And before I leave you, you deserve to hear it. You are none other than the son of...
Mum? Mum?
Gripping and intense.
Don't talk to me about hope or doing the right thing. If you're going to get out of here, then give me a gun and get out my way.
The New York Times calls this movie one of the all-time greats. Gripping.
These figures are impossible. If my calculations are correct, then this podcast has been transported back 65 million years to the Jurassic time period. That just can't be. That just can't be.
Guest starring Lady Cornelia.
Yes, I am a lady, but let there be no mistake here. I will punch you in the face if I have to.
Guest starring Jared Murphy.
Whoa, this place is old. I mean, really, really old. This is so cool.
Guest starring Dean Finch.
I tell you what, I know my rights in this country, and it had nothing to do with you taking my guns.
They took all he had.
What do you think, Skip?
I say we go get them. We get our people back.
And now, it's personal. Slick Podcast, the movie, in cinemas from October 18th.
You have tuned in for a Slick Podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only Slick Podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from, and a very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Simon Laurie King. Coming up on today's show, my guest returning today is Howard Micoski. Howard has written books, articles, blogs, and he has been interviewed many times on shows from around the world, and has given talks on a variety of different subjects, from the high strangeness of the world fairs, and one of my personal favourites that I find very intriguing is the mystery of Rennes Le Chateau in southern France, and its connection with the Knights Templar and the search for and possible finding by a humble village priest of a powerful holy relic, allegedly used by him for the attainment of great riches, and seemingly to hold the influence of some powerful people and establishment of the day. Howdie's latest book is titled Exit the Cave, a no-punches-pulled look at our reality, or rather from the perspective most of us are shown and accept. This book uses Plato's allegory of the cave, the captives within and the shadows that are perceived as true reality. Howard's book Exit the Cave is deep and in places dark, as all caves tend to be, but he also gives a fictional story at the end that has a very profound and compelling narrative. I've read this book and was lucky to be involved in its early stages and giving Howard feedback, and for that experience I am truly grateful. I could add so much more about this book, but I will be asking Howard to briefly expand on its content later on. As mentioned, he has written and researched into the high strangeness of the world fairs from the mid-18th and early 19th centuries that highlight some building achievements in technological anomalies that shouldn't have existed back then, and also some anomalies that mirror the very dark and nefarious happenings of today. No, really. Further to this subject, Howard released a YouTube video late last month, and you'll be able to find out his conclusions thus far. I say thus far because Howard is among the very few people I know that their thinking is fluid. That is to say, their opinions change honestly, without ego, if more information is found pertaining to their research or thinking, and therefore not stuck in the mud of my book is written, therefore the subject is closed. And to me, that honesty is refreshing, as it is essential. The link for the blog is attached below in the show notes. It's definitely worth a read. In fact, again, essential, I'd say, because having the whole perspective of what someone is presenting is key. Howard has, of course, written other books, and there is a link in the show notes below to Howard's site, his books, blogs, videos, articles, and any and all upcoming events. So then, with the groundwork now done, and without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Howdy Mickoski back to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Simon.
Let's get the ball rolling on this one. As a theme or a personal observation then, I have more chance of being abducted by aliens and taken to their home planet and declared grand overlord than ever waking up to learn that this world has finally got its shit together. Sad, but true. So under that heading and of our society, the current direction of things and the death of common sense, I must point out that what I'm seeing around me these days gives me cause for great concern. As an opener then, Howard, talk to me about that large box of confusion and concern I have.
Well, I don't think you're alone, obviously. All you have to do is, or anybody, right, just look at the basic news. Some of the stuff is crazy. Like, it's so crazy. Just as an example, there was a woman who was on a talk show, like a podcast, a month ago or something, upset because she couldn't find a boyfriend because she identifies as a dog and she can't find anyone who would throw a stick so she can go chase it. Find anyone who would throw a stick so she can go chase it, and she just wonders why she doesn't have a boyfriend. It's examples like this. Yeah, it's examples like this that are just going on and on and on. So the question becomes, in one sense, this reality, have people always been this insane? It's just that it was somehow controlled and we never saw it. And this kind of, really bizarre mental behavior was caught at an earlier time. Or is the problem that bizarre, and there's being alternative or being different is fine, but then there's things that are just so abnormal that are they just being encouraged now? Is that the difference? Is it just that they're being encouraged when before there was a discouraging of it or an attempt to step in and assist? It's because it's a very strange thing because it's obvious anyone who's over 50 years old, let's say, or 40 at least, we've seen a world where, not that it was sane by any stretch of the imagination, but it was relatively, you kind of knew what you were going to get on a daily basis. When today, it's like brand new, every day, something wacky. Flip side, of course, you're still getting a lot of really kind, helpful people, particularly those who are working with like rescuing sick and neglected and abused animals. I mean, thankfully, there's so much information that is coming out. So my answer to your question, simple answer would be, I think there's more insanity than there ever has been. But on the same token, because of social media, because of the internet, more of it can be presented. And for some reason, more of it is encouraged to continue. So I think you're seeing just how much has kind of always existed. Just like now that you can go on and, like I say, see these animal rescuers. 40 years ago, we knew they existed, but we didn't have any direct interaction with them. We didn't see videos of them working. So I'm not necessarily sure it's totally an explosion of craziness now. I think it's partially an explosion of craziness and partially an explosion of it's accessible to everyone on the internet.
But do you think that social media, let's say the internet, I can pretty much put myself out there and say solely on the shoulder to the internet, or at least the acceleration of this madness?
Yeah, that's the thing, acceleration, right? Screens have been a propaganda tool since they came out. It's been presented as entertainment, but even right from the first movie screens that were available in the 1920s. I mean, if you've ever seen some of those early first movies that existed, I mean, they're insane. Never mind people today. The first, like, say, 10 or 15 years of silent movies, they're just on a level of insanity that's like just wow. So the indoctrination began as soon as movies started. Once you had television, and then you had the ability to get into people's heads, because it's called programming, right? It's television programming. They're telling you what they're doing. They're literally programming the mind with the screen. But once you added the computer element to it, so now and with this phone, so you're taking it everywhere with you. You're staring at a screen, and I think the biggest danger that's come of it is that people have come to trust the screen will tell them what they need to know. They don't need to think. They don't need to look into anything. They don't need to know what the weather, they don't need to look outside at the weather. How many people today, I wonder, could read a map? Like if you put them in the next city over where they don't know too well and said, you're starting here, and circled that on a map, circled the other part on a map. Okay, you don't even have to drive. They could just walk there. Would people be able to do it? I would be stunned that, at least a third of people might not be able to follow a map. And so I think what's happened is you've had this bizarre, the biggest danger, I think, has been this belief that the screen is telling you what you need to know. Trust the screen. The screen has become the new authority figure, that if the screen tells you, that has to be right. And that flips to all the alternative stuff too, because then there are people who, okay, we reject the mainstream. Someone will reject the major news, for example. Well, they'll go to the alternative sources and they'll just automatically trust that because it's the opposite of what the mainstream says. So the alternative must be true. It's still bizarrely very few that are really take the information, sit down and think about it and try to come to a deeper understanding of what's going on. The deception, how would I describe this? The screen has become one of the great levels of deception within the dream itself, within the simulation. It's like the simulation is a deception to begin with. And then we've got now through the screen a secondary layer of deception. That's why it is so hard, or so much more difficult today, for people to see through the totality of the lies that surround them.
I think that the symbiosis between mobile phone technology as far as it's gone, as far as it can at the moment, because we are very much in a symbiotic state with it. And my phone, it reads my face, It has all of my details on it, and it's essential. I think, or I pretend to myself it's essential. That's probably better. But your point about, would you give people maps? Some people could, but a lot of people wouldn't. The answer would be, well, why do I need to? Or you could say to them, well, here's a television without a remote control. All of these things would make the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. But one gives you a great skill, learning to read a map, because it is, if suddenly the mobile phones go down, you have to learn to orientate the map. A symbiosis has happened unwittingly, without questioning, because it does make it easier for a mobile phone, paying my bills and this, that, and the other. But it also becomes a go-to thing to suckle on. So rather than maybe get out my lorry and go and talk to my fellow co-worker, I'll just sit in there and I'll just stare at the screen, looking at nothing, absolutely nothing. And I couldn't have told you what I've looked at. And I realize I do this rather than try and put myself on a pedestal saying everyone else does it. I don't. I do. And because I see myself doing it, it's of great concern how much that symbiosis has taken place. So before we move on, could you just comment on that then, please, Howard, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I've never had one of those phones that can take the internet. I still use like one of the old Nokia phones that literally just all you can do is phone and send text messages. That's it.
Brilliant.
That's
brilliant.
Because for me, that's what I need a phone for. And partially, I guess, even though I know I don't want to have that access, part of me even says that even if it's there, I could be tempted. Another thing that helps me with having an old phone is you try to go to some place that demands something. Oh, you need to pay with this, or you need to, this is my phone. I can't do that. Oh, and then they'll find a workaround. There's always a workaround. They'll always, oh yeah, well, we can do this. You can just, so it's like, I don't actually need it. And if it got to the point where I did need it for, that's where this is going, right? At some point, that phone is another one people don't understand. That phone is like the mark of the beast. There's certain places in the world where you can't get services, you can't get through a checkpoint, if you don't have your phone with you, you are literally, that is your identification card to move anywhere through various checkpoints. And that's how it'll be as World War III escalates and everything begins to shut down more and more where people live. That phone will become people's checkpoint. So someone like me who doesn't have one and won't have one, very quickly I will be excluded from literally being a part of society. And I've become okay with that. I've decided that very early on, when certain elements of technology began to spring forward, I made the choice of at some point in time, it'll be you're either using the technology or you're basically out of society and theoretically starving to death, and I'll take starving to death. I would rather die human than live in some kind of technologically robotic state. So it's a choice I made early on to stay as human as obviously I have a computer right now. I'm talking to you on the internet. I haven't moved to the wilderness and gone to 1700s lifestyle, but that wouldn't be so bad to me if I actually tipped the scales and went full bore. As I know, Simon and I have become friends here over the last few years, and I know Simon is living himself as much as possible on his farm in his area in a very semi-self-sufficient state. So, yeah.
It's the analogy you drew, and we will move on, about the mark of the beast. I've thought about this as well, without the connotations and of one of the great religions, not as in great, yay, I mean just as in size wise. That very much is, the mark of the beast, and that makes it more worrying also. So let's move on, Howard. Could we touch upon the world fairs of the late 18th and early 19th centuries? You have researched and written extensively upon this subject in your book, Exposing the Expositions. I recently read an excellent blog from last month on your site on YouTube, written by you pertaining to this subject. What I took away from this blog, it's as though you were drawing this subject as far as your vested energy is concerned, to a close, but with a valuable final conclusion of your own personal opinion on this topic. Could you give a brief overview, first of all, of what the World Fairs were, some of the anomalies, and the initial interest you had?
World Fairs are giant expositions that have been running since 1851. They still continue today. It was recently in Dubai. When I grew up, I knew there'd been one in Montreal a few years before I was born. There was one in Vancouver in Canada, but I didn't really pay much attention to them, and I didn't really know anything about their history. After I'd been in Florence in 2019, and I was studying cathedrals to examine how the cathedrals might be machined. So I was looking at the buildings in energetic machine technology. And when I got back to where I live, I happened to bump into the Chicago Exposition, the 1893 World Fair. And when you actually look at the construction of it, the 700 acres of just massive buildings, all said to be built in 2 years, and then found out that these fairs were happening all over the world at this particular time. They were through the United States, through Europe, through Australia, through East Asia, into Africa, they were South America, they were everywhere. And then they would build these fairs, these massive buildings and structures, and then as soon as it's over, they'd bring in dynamite and blow them up. That was the story. And when I heard that, I had two problems. The first was, why would you blow these things up? Why would you put in the equivalent today of billions of dollars into something and then literally destroy the whole thing after 6 months? That obviously that's beyond insane, and there's something wrong with the story. But secondly, as a historian, this bothered me because I went through university. I studied a lot of historical stuff. I on my own, I looked into anything that was interesting. I took late 18th or late 19th century American history. Never once was the World Fairs ever brought up. And I mean, St. Louis had 1,000 acres of buildings. And so why did I not hear about it? And then why was the story so bizarre? So long story short, once I began to dig into it, I began to see not just the buildings were a problem. You had a problem with construction photos where there really aren't proper construction photos. And I found that most of those were doctored and photoshopped. You had problems with what was actually going on at the fairs, which was seemingly an indoctrination of the population. I began to realize that before television, before movies, before the internet, this was a way of having like basically a worldwide traveling propaganda machine that was going to teach people what they needed to know about history, science. It was basically like a traveling Wikipedia show. It's the best way to describe it. And then as I began to dig into it more, it began to be clear that possibly an entire civilization worldwide had been destroyed one way or another. And these fairs were a marker point of a giant reset. I used the word reset in the book because it was an alternative historical word at the time. And then here we hit 2020 and all the insanity, and all we hear about is the Great Reset. And I realized, holy crap, these fairs were the starter point of the last reset. It got to finally get the point of Simon's question here, the movement to the question. I've been studying these things for 4 years, and it just, I finally got relatively to the point where I've moved on to other things, and I'm letting other people continue historical work if they want. I've come to realize all history's a lie, and I don't need to study it too much anymore. But I got curious when I was looking at some more photographs of the fairs, and it doesn't matter what fair you look at, whether it's Buffalo, Omaha, Paris, it doesn't matter what fair you look at. They're from very high angles. And the photos are very pristine. There's never any garbage. There's never anything out of place anywhere in the photographs. And I began to realize they look a lot like models, like the way you would make a diorama and then photograph it. Those angles are similar. And those clean images are similar. And I wound up having a conversation with a gentleman who's just actually gone in for cancer surgery, so hope Matthew's doing okay, on a thing called Marvelous Old World, I think is the name of the channel on YouTube. And we had about an hour and a half discussion. He is he's a builder of all sorts of like round structures. So he has tremendous amount of personal building construction knowledge. And we went through a lot of the discussions on the World Fairs of buildings and photographs. And if we could try to determine, could these things have been built at all, or what might have been built, how little of the thing might have been built. So if someone's interested in the topic, it was a really good discussion. You can track that through my local channel, through my website, and you can hear that discussion. But simplified, they are the most bizarre thing I've ever come across, because even at modern Olympics, you might put $1 billion into building your Olympic structures. You don't blow every building up with dynamite as soon as the Olympics are over. You keep some of them for purposes going on. At these world fairs, supposedly they built all of them temporary structures, like the equivalent of a giant movie set. This is what they try to tell you, all built with this stuff called staff. And they made one real building, of course. They just happen to have one real one, whole bunch of fakes, and then they just blow the whole thing up when it's done. It was obviously garbage. And I'll be honest, I don't have an actual answer as to what was going on there. All I could come across is that the standard story is a complete lie. And what's really going on, who knows, actually.
I mean, I have to apologize. Yes, it's the expositions rather than the world fairs. But also, I think, this subject is, I'm not telling you, Howard, but inform my listeners that this subject is absolutely huge. We can't possibly cover all of it. So I would read Howard's book, Exposing the Expositions, but also pertaining to this conversation about drawing a line under it. I would go on to, I'll put a link into the show notes to click onto Howard's video pertaining to this subject, what we're talking about here, and read the blog. It puts it all in context. Yeah, I think that's very, very important. Read his book as well. There are certainly some anomalies. I mean, one I'd like to briefly touch on before we move on, Howard, is, again, in your blog, you mention it. I'm not going to talk about everything in the blog because it's just so much worth a read. I really enjoyed it. Is about there were child passports. And what I got from the blog is the only people why would you need a passport going to an exposition? But the only people who had them were, and correct me if I'm wrong, were children. And I think this has an eerie parallel to what definitely is going on today. So can we briefly touch on that before we move on, please, Howard?
Sure. Yeah, that was a very weird thing. These passports that you would get in the early days, they still hold them now. Like if you go to some recent fairs, they have these children get a fake passport, and then they go around and they get it stamped at various little centers, and they make it pretend like they're traveling around. But these original ones were not like little fake fun things. They were like real identity documents. And we're talking about like 1898, 1901. You're not just creating a document. They were photographic pictures on them. So in 1899, for example, the amount of technological work it requires to take a photograph of a person at the gate, get the photograph developed, get it on this identification card, get all the details about the person on the card, from hair color and et cetera, et cetera. It's bizarre, and it seems like it's only children. There's not many of them that still exist, but based on the numbers on the card, because each card has a particular number, there were hundreds or thousands of these cards passed out. So it's a tremendous amount of work, and there's no reason for it. Like, why would some kid need an identification card to walk around the Buffalo World Fair? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It does make sense if it's some sort of underground sale of, children going on. And we know the two things that link to these world fairs bizarrely at this time is the famous orphan trains, where in the United States, you just had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of kids with no parents and no explanation of why there's no parents, why there's no adults, just a whole bunch of kids. And then they would fire them onto trains and send them off to the middle of the country to work in coal mines and whatever else. It's like adults just didn't exist. There were just kids everywhere. And then you've also got these massive supposed building of insane asylums. So everywhere you look, cities have like these insane asylums that are bigger and more beautiful than Medici palaces in Florence. And why do you need a whole bunch of insane asylums in 1880? It makes sense if we're dealing with the end of a reset. So the best way to populate a world after a reset is children, because children have no knowledge of anything. You can tell a child anything, particularly coming out of trauma. If you give a child any answer out of trauma, they will believe you. And if you've got a bunch of adults who aren't going along with the story, well, you just declare them insane and get rid of them, put them in these buildings, and they stay in there until they choose to go along with the story. I think what's most chilling about the whole thing is that it's like a precursor to what this reality is going to see here really soon. That's why I think the study of the World's Fairs is important, not so much to figure out what happened then. It's to use then as a likely template that's going to happen again. And that's what's going to happen to this world. As this simulation gets cracking down and begins to end, we might see it's like ask questions of how will we see the late 1800s replayed in our modern times. And if you're aware of it and you know what's happening, you can navigate it somewhat. If you don't know what's going on, you're just going to be sucked into it like a moth to a flame.
Well, before we move on, the parallels I would draw to your last statement there would be, so the children allegedly, if they were being trafficked back then and for sale, if it were, on exhibition, at the exhibition itself, the parallels are absolutely in this. There are children trafficked. In fact, there's a group that a group of people who go in and save these children. I can't say the name yet. I hope to secure an interview on the show. They're coming on. But the other parallel, which is very weird, which you briefly touched on in a previous interview, I'm not sure. I can't remember if it's in your book, Exposing the Expositions, but it's also the fires which were in America, stones being melted. But the parallel there I would draw to some theorists, I'm not going to say conspiracy theory, I don't like that term, but some theorists that Hawaii and around the world have had wildfires deliberately happen through technology, whether it be satellite or anything. So that is a parallel I would draw. So that's two parallels that I would draw from that earlier time of the late 80s, and also the Carrington event as well. I'm waiting for that one to be redone. Yep. But anyway, sorry, let's draw a line under that one. Howard, if you've got anything else to say about that, have you?
But the book also goes into, the bizarre city fires that have no explanation, that just kind of magically swept across the country. And again, within a year or two, all the cities were magically rebuilt. None of it makes any sense.
No, not at all. It doesn't. But the parallels are very spooky. So let's talk about and for the benefit of my viewers, the reason we're jumping around here, I find Howard, we're friends off air as well. I find Howard's work very interesting. He's covered a lot of things and greatly in depth, but he will also tell you this is my opinion, as in Howard's opinion. He won't ever tell you, no, this is a fact, unless he is sure on that. And Howard's thought process is fluid, which we must all take that into account. So if you write a book and you say, no, this is it, and that's final, authors generally are unapproachable if you find new evidence or a new way of thinking. However, Howard is not. He's willing to talk. Anyway, so let's move on. So this is why we're changing. This is why we're talking about different subjects. So let's talk about the 1968 BBC fictional drama titled Bending the News, or Newsbenders. Its main cast members, if I remember rightly, were Donald Pleasance and Nigel Davenport. Production was either eerily predictive to our here and now, and again, I'll leave a link in the show notes for people who want to watch this, or luckily on the mark. Could you talk to us about this drama and, in your opinion, as to its message?
Okay, yeah, that's one of the weirdest 30 minutes of television I've probably ever come across. Yeah, it's called Newsbenders. It was part of a BBC drama type weekly show that would run on, like the equivalent of like a theater production that was put on television, is the best way to describe it. this 30-minute program was, and yeah, please go see it. It will blow your mind. It went through the Donald Pleasance was hiring Davenport to be like a new story writer for the news, but they were writing stories years in advance. Like, so in 1968, they would be writing the stories for 1972, 1973. And he took them through these back rooms where they are building all of the news, all of the sets, all of the ideas, so that they're literally presenting the news in advance. Just that in itself was shocking, right? That in 1968, they're telling you that they're basically creating every story that you're going to see in the news years in advance. But by the end of the episode, it was revealed that the decision-making process on what the news should be was coming from a few floors up, which was a bank of computers, and that computers were making all the decisions. That, in a sense, they were saying AI already in 1968 is making all of the decisions going on in the world. For me, it was like, how does this get on the air? How does this get on the air in 1968? Because they've literally just told you reality. They've literally just presented the entire way of the deception in this reality in that 30 minutes. It was truly staggering. And
it was a show and tell, wasn't it? It was a show and tell, because I remember, if that was 1968, 69 was the Apollo 11 moon landing. Let's pretend it was an actual thing. But in that documentary, sorry, slip of the tongue, that show and tell, he showed you the stage of a rocket landing on the moon. I'm sure I remember that. Sorry for jotting in there, but yeah, carry on, Howard. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's all of those things were in there. They had certain nuclear wars, but the moon landing stuff was, it was in there. It was in the actual thing that was being shown. And it was, again, when I watched it, I had to watch it like 2 or 3 times because I didn't really believe what I just seen. Like, and the first thing I thought, is this real? Like, did this really go on? And when I looked into it, when I actually went in, okay, so let's start digging into Internet Movie Database. Yeah, you can get information on like the main characters, right? You can get information on the 2 main actors. There was a third woman who was playing like the secretary. But once you start going into who was the writer of this, who was the director, you find very strange individuals. That's the best way I can describe it. I don't remember off the top of my head now, but it's like the writer, this is the only thing they ever wrote. It's like the supposed writer wrote only 1 episode ever, and the director had been involved in some strange stuff at the same, like he was also involved in some very bizarre type of programming. I just looked it up. Yeah, the directors or the writers claim to be Desmond Loudon. So I just happened to be an internet database. So he's listed as having written a play of the week, the 30-minute theater, this Newsbenders thing, and then he wrote nothing for 20 years until he wrote something called BBC Two Playhouse and a couple of like seemingly nothing little novels and books and whatnot. So where does that idea come from to start with, where it just sort of shows up out of nowhere? You've got another writer named Sean McLaughlin. Sorry for going into this, but it's just so weird. He's also he wrote some scripts for this particular series and was a part of a couple of other things. Okay, but now we go to the director, Rudolph Cartier. And Rudolph Cartier wrote, and let me just, or directed, I'm trying to remember now because I've looked into this for a while. It's been a while since I've looked into it. If you look at his overview, there are some strange things that he has been a part of. And it's kind of like, well, who was really involved in this situation? Who was really behind this? I just get the sense that the ones that they claim wrote and did this are probably not who did it. That they were the ones who, they put their names on it, but I don't doubt if this is what's it, MI6 in England. I don't doubt this is an MI6 production. They've laid it all on the line, like you say, for people, and put it as a documentary and threw some names on it of some other people who claimed they were the ones that handled this, and off they go.
Yeah, like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes, and I thoroughly recommend for you, my dear listeners, to watch that. If nothing else, just to laugh at maybe our findings, but I can't see how you would. It literally, there is, apart from the flares, which are very tasteful, I think. If I could wear flares, I'd definitely wear them again. But apart from that, it hasn't aged. Really, it hasn't. There's no CGI, which is refreshing. There's no special effects. In fact, if you look at everything, it's kind of laughable. Unless, of course, you see the coldness behind and you look at today and think, trying to think of the better word. Yes, it's actually reality. Okay, then, moving on. Your book, Exit the Cave, published in October of 2022, pulls no punches in its rhetoric, explaining the world we find ourselves in. I know we briefly touched on this at the beginning, but in fact, to quote the book's opening description, most people will say something feels terribly wrong. Really? That's a bit I've added. With reality, the world, life, why is that? Because something is wrong. This whole experience called life on Earth is a falsified lie. End quote. Explain the title, Exiting the Cave, if you would, and let's take a wee sample of it from there.
I chose the title of the book. I'm actually working on Exit the Cave 2. I'm hoping that will be ready May, June, a much more deeper dig into the subject matter. I chose it because after I'd finished exposing the expositions and my Falling for Truth book that both came out in 2019, in the midst of at the end, when I was still on YouTube, putting YouTube videos out, I was doing a lot of Plato's Cave videos, and those stories of the metaphor of Plato's Cave had a lot of interest. And I thought, well, this is given where we are, this is a valuable subject to go into simulation theory, go into the nature of reality. And exit the cave means to exit the simulation, exit reality. And unfortunately, you will find a lot of that on the internet. If you just Google search exit the matrix, exit the cave, you'll find hundreds of entries. But usually when someone is talking, what they're talking about is they'll be talking about moving into the woods. They'll be talking about the flat earth. They'll be talking about not using a smartphone. They'll talk about becoming a vegetarian. They'll talk about, dealing with their straw man and not following the regular legal system and coming up with your own commercial currency. It's all about disengaging from technology in this world. Exiting Plato's cave is the entire matrix of reality, of this entire universe. That's the material realm, the etheric realm, the astral realm, the super duper realm, the fabulous realm, the nirvana realm, the whatever realm you want to call it. It's all a matrix. It's all part of the simulation. It's all part of the deception. You can't you can't disengage from one tiny bit of it and not disengage from the rest and think you've exited. Exiting the matrix is the equivalent of walking out of Plato's cave completely, which is to exit the entire simulation. The tricky thing is that language is challenging, which one of the things I have to go through in the new book is relate to people that actually, as long as you still think you are exiting the cave, you will never actually exit. This is going to be a clue for people where this is going. It's language that can be used. Language, of course, is terrible for anything that's important. But if you get caught up in this idea of, I am trapped in a simulated reality and I am going to exit the simulated reality, that still has you trapped in the simulated reality. So it requires a complete 180 to see what the simulation is and what you are. And that's why when I look into Exit the Cave, or normally when someone says Exit the Matrix and does a video on it, there's a little bit of really trying to see the depth of the simulation, but not really. And there's almost none that's involved in self-definition, that is trying to turn things around and actually define who or what is this thing I call me, who or what is this thing that I claim is trapped in the simulation. That huge part of the work is just ignored. And so the new book, I hope, will begin to, for those who are serious, those who have an intent as their deepest intention, as their true commitment, which is to return to source, know themselves, exit the matrix, reach their totality, whatever you want to call it, that this book will now be able to provide some of the working tools to actually create what you most desire.
We will be right back after this message.
Hi, I'm Senator Jason Gruber, and I'm head of the Senate Committee for Child Affairs here in Washington. I'm grateful to the Slick Podcast for allowing me a few minutes of your time today. I'm here to tell you about the ANTI program and how we are rolling this amazing innovation out across our country and shortly across the rest of the planet. What is ANTI? Artificial, unsupervised, neural, tech, interactive, educator. The ANTI modules are supplied without cost and installed and maintained free of charge. They're designed to be suitable for children of 18 months to 12 years old and are now, thanks to recent legislation, obligatory, or until child reaches self-reliance and hygiene independence. Each module supports child's dietary needs and hydration and has interactive physical exercise apparatus. The ANTI-AI ensures that the child is stimulated and comfortable. This cutting-edge artificial intelligence technology within the module monitors health as well as protecting the child from outside dangers such as fire or threats to life, which includes home intruders. The module can only be opened by the biometrics of the child's guardian. Interactive cartoons and their characters encourage the child to eat, sleep, and learn when the desired or sanctioned timing is programmed. The ANTI-AI is designed to educate up to a teenage intelligence level. Further education levels are available on request. The ANTI module is also designed to diagnose and care for disabilities and impairments. If such an ailment is detected and diagnosed, the artificial intelligence will alert the guardians and the appropriate government agencies for advice and/or course of treatment and subsequent action. This system's AI will free the parents or guardians to pursue careers and fully contribute to society during their 12-hour work period. Other advantages of having an ANTI? It is hoped by its developers that the intelligence levels of the child through AI's education will exceed that of their parents or guardian. Now, this is a gift from our government, so be aware that any application to have the ANTI module removed prematurely before the child has reached 12 years old and completed their social orientation will incur an investigation by the appropriate government agency to assess justifications as to the reasons why. If the module is removed upon approval, users will be charged for the original cost of the module installation and any maintenance incurred up to the time of application and for its removal. This sum must be paid upon the panel's agreement for removal. The applicant has 7 days to ensure the funds are paid in full. If funds are not paid within the time frame, approval will be rescinded without any further opportunity for appeal. What are the other benefits to society, I hear you ask? New developments and innovations are currently being employed into the many correctional facilities around our country also. Modules are being developed for short and long-term serving prisoners and for their rehabilitation. That can only be a good thing, right? Auntie is definitely a name you can trust. Thank you for your time.
The Sleep Podcast. Yeah, it's a Sleep Podcast. Truly unforgettable topic. This is Sleep Podcast.
I was lucky enough for you to allow me to critique a few chapters in the first draft of your book, Exit in the Cave. And I'm very glad that I did. An excellent book. Very, very deep, not in a hippie type way, but this isn't a, it's going to come out wrong, but it's not meant that way. It's not a book of hope. It's just the way Howard sees it. And I really do recommend this book. So having read it myself, Howard, both as a critique and then the finished article, which I both enjoyed, and I thank you for that experience. How important is it that we do not trap ourselves? And this is self-talk for me as well, to remind me, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, but the essentiality, there's a new word, of thinking about the here and the now. That to me is the most important time in our lives. How important is that, Howard?
Well, it's again, as first of all, as Simon said, all of these things that I write about, particularly Exit the Cave, these are my thesis, my views on things after 30 years of examination and work and personal exercises and deep examination of reality. So it's there to make people think, just like this conversation is just here to make you think, not to get anyone to necessarily believe what I say. However, I know that what I do talk about, many others out there have come to their own similar viewpoints and tend to be, if they share it with people, they tend to be told, well, you're crazy to think like that. And so they kind of, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I shouldn't think like that. And I'm just, part of me still doing this is to remind people to not necessarily trust what other people think, trust what you think, trust what you've come to see as reality and your own examination of it. Here and now, you've got two issues, right? I tend to now have come to see reality as I call it a simulation, but whether you want to call it a dream or an illusionary realm or a manifested projection, it doesn't matter how you want to describe it. So on one level, all of the reality, it's funny because we call it reality and none of it is real. Right? There's no realness to anything that's here. However, there is a continuing experience. The awareness that we've come to feel is locked in this particular body with this particular name and this particular identity is having a continuous experience. And that is where many people who have actually an honest experience of seeing reality as non-real, they then come up with the idea, well, I will ignore reality. Yeah, I know there's dinner being had and there's my neighbor next door is this and I've got this job I'm supposed to go to. It's like, well, it's all fake and I'm just going to sit in my room and drink tea and it doesn't matter. This is very big now in the Neo-Advaita movement, which is just sit, drink your tea and laugh. It's not real. And that's an improper viewpoint of what's going on. There is a continuing experience. And until you've come to truly understand who you are and what the experiencing, we'll call it projection, is, you have to interact with the projection in such a way that not so much that, I guess the big shift will start to happen is when you don't see it as real. A lot of the need to be successful, a lot of the things I've had to succeed or be important or be liked or be thought of as someone of any way of use, that's kind of just dropped away. It's just kind of like, in a movie, does it matter? If I'm in a movie, does it matter if I win or lose the basketball game? Well, no, this doesn't matter at all. It's a movie. It's just a script. So I can let go of the need for anything to have a specific outcome, but it doesn't mean I ignore reality. First of all, the physical element, the physical realm that, or physical thing that I'm using, we'll call it a vehicle that's being used now, is an energy source. And that energy source, which is being mined by the demiurge simulation, as we talked about last time, to keep it running. So we've got the simulation trying to steal your energy. But if you want to learn anything, if you want to actually know something, you need a massive amount of energy. Energy is required for the work. So what I come to share with people is the most important thing, not so much as day to day, moment to moment, what's happening. It's what's occurring with your energy. Are you in any moment wasting energy, giving energy away, or are you storing energy? Because it's that stored energy that then usually gets wasted. People just put it into their own self-importance, put it into having more sex, getting more money, getting more whatever, as opposed to using it for something that can propel them to deep knowledge and deep understanding and deep power. But you need the energy. If you don't have the energy, you can't do anything. You know, if you're really ill or you're not functioning well, you don't have the energy required. So Richard Rowe is a teacher that I really have come to like over the years. His number one thing, if you're on a spiritual path, don't worry so much about all the spiritual stuff you're supposed to do. It's number one, get your house in order. Like if you've got problems functioning on a day-to-day level, like you can't pay your rent and you can't get food on the table, like the amount of energy that is going into the worry and the concern and the anxiety is like you don't have anything left for your spiritual search. So get the basics under your feet. Get the basics of what you need taken care of. If you've got trauma in your past, great. It's unfortunate, but work through the trauma. That's where you've got to start with. Trauma is going to be potentially a very powerful movement force, a very powerful seeing force, but you can't deny that it's there. You can't pretend that it didn't happen. And the more of all of these areas that, as he called it, getting your house in order happen, getting a foundation under your feet, becoming very, very grounded in a reality that seems very real, but being very grounded within it, all of a sudden you have a massive amount of energy available for something else. And if you make good choices on what the something else will be, you can go really, really quickly and really, really deep. The processes or the traditions of like Hatha yoga or Qigong, they're not really about health. They're not really about feeling better. They're not really about having a mindfulness, peaceful mind. Those are secondary benefits. It's really about energy storage. And then with that energy storage, you could move from Qigong, for example, to Taoist alchemy, where you could take that energy, place it from which is now inside the alchemic vessel, and use it to be able to, in a sense, shatter the greatest walls and deceptions and belief lies that are covering what we don't really know between what we really are and what we come to believe is not, which is false. So it's all about energy. So for me, you're using the day-to-day experiences mostly as a test. Am I storing energy? Am I gaining energy, or am I losing it? And if you're losing energy, if you notice I'm losing energy, there's your now number one, that is your only spiritual goal is A, how do I stop losing energy? And then B, how do I start storing it?
Before we get on to the last couple of questions, because obviously I know your time is valuable, and I do thank you for your time today. I'll make a couple of points before we move on that about you storing your energy, using energy to spend it wisely, I would say. And the analogy I give, that I'm on this journey and many snake oil salesmen or carpetbaggers along the way to distract me or take my energy. You know, it's not meaningful. It's just a distraction. Then if I hadn't been distracted, if I hadn't give them the energy to that no thing, I would have been further forward. And the other thing, I'd like you to comment on that quickly, but the other thing as well, Howard, where are all the gurus? So in any order, then we'll move on to my last couple of questions. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? They've all kind of disappeared in the last 4 years. Or the ones that haven't have shown themselves through to be liars and fakes. This is something that should have been seen so clearly. Like if you're living through the biggest lie in relative history, relative experience, and you can't see that, how are you supposed to be trusted to be able to lead anyone to ultimate truth? Like, you have to start in the relative. This is something I've also shared with many people. If you want ultimate freedom, you can't give away your relative freedom. Yeah, you might not be a real person, and it might not be a real world, but it seems like it. And if you give up your freedom in this reality, in this experience, how are you ever going to gain ultimate freedom? If you give up anything, if you give up a relative state, you're not going to have a chance at an ultimate state. So that's why this reality is a testing ground, and the gurus have all pretty much failed. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the guru movements, a lot of these big organizations are now, interestingly, because of the COVID experience, they're under legal litigation. They've got lawsuits against them now, because a lot of what the guru element needs is it needs people coming into the hall to sit with the grand, wonderful guru and get their energy. Really what they're doing is they're placing a hypnotic state on the people. Really what they're doing is they're placing a hypnotic state. If you go through how to create a hypnotic state in someone, and then you watch how so many of the gurus set up their room and what they do and how they speak, it's all a hypnotic setup. So once the COVID stuff came in, and if the organization agreed with the rules, they said, oh yeah, we can't have meetings, we can't do this, we have to do everything online, we have to do it through Zoom and Skype. Well, now the hypnotic state wasn't being created, and the people who were having the Zoom meetings could start talking behind the scenes and saying, hey, I don't feel the same anymore. I think there's something strange about this. What? Oh, he slept with you too. Yeah, he slept with me. And he's not supposed to be sleeping with anybody. And what? He asked for $10,000 from me? Yeah, I gave him $10,000. And all of a sudden, people away from the hypnotic state started to speak, started to talk, started to find out the lie they were being told, or the story they were being told, wasn't truthful. So we take this back to the first thing you brought up about technology and smartphones and the internet. It's kind of similar. As long as people are staring at those screens, they're not going to be able to step back from it and connect constantly with other members of their local community and talk, really talk. Not just this is what the weather is. Oh, I'm building a new deck. Oh, I've got a few new cows. I mean, literally to start talking about, hey, the government's doing this. This is going on. This is happening. This is crazy. But that's all it would take. That's all it would take. If the whole internet was shut down for like 2 weeks, first of all, there'd be mass panic. The average person would go, the withdrawal symptoms would be horrible because it's an addiction. But once somebody could get through the addiction and they had to start literally interacting with other people, they might start talking about things. And as they talk about things, they might start saying, finally, holy crap, how did I not see this? Well, you didn't see it because you were staring at your phone. All of a sudden, and I'm not talking to the people listening to this now. Most of you, if you're listening to someone like Simon and other people, you're taking your eyes away from your phone sometimes. The majority of the population don't. The majority of the population, and whether they're NPCs or they're real humans, that's a massive discussion that can go on. Whether they're NPCs or they're real humans, that's a massive discussion that can go on as well. But the point being is they are so divorced from having any questioning about society and about what's going on in the world that it would take a shutdown for it to happen. So in Simon's question about the gurus, the COVID shutdown exposed a lot of them. And it's so, one other thing interesting, there's some I had used to listen to, some I thought were pretty good. Of course, I dropped them like a hot potato once I saw how they couldn't see through the lie. But when before they would get 50, 60,000 viewers on YouTube, now they get 3,000. A whole lot of other people have disengaged from this entire spectrum now. I don't think they've gone anywhere else yet. They're kind of in this they're in this limbo state. They've gotten out of some of the new age stuff, but they don't know where else to go yet. Hopefully there will be some very positive things where they can turn to soon enough, but the world's going to get challenging soon enough that they're going to be focused on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think when you first asked me that question, you said to me, it was months ago, probably a couple of years ago, maybe, or made the observation. You said, where are all the gurus? I instantly thought of what was happening in the world back then. Somebody standing up from, this is not religion or faith bashing. They're not the same thing, but they are closely related. This isn't that. All I'm saying is somebody should stand up and say this has to stop. And obviously they're going to be asked what? This, all of this, whatever this has become, this has to stop. You know, regardless of their, the head person telling them not to. And I'm not talking about the Sky Daddy or the great creator, whatever. But, you know, if you believe that the Almighty speaks to you on a personal basis, two pieces of advice. One, I'm happy for you and keep it to yourself and don't force it on others. But if you are of that conviction, then stand up and point it out. You know, the king has no clothes. Don't be afraid. You know, this is what I do. This is what Howard does. Maybe not in those exact words, but honestly, I'm not afraid to say that. You know, some people may say I always AI bash. Yes, I do, because I'm very, very worried. Actually, no, scrub that. Scared of where that could take us. So before we move on, sorry I keep doing add-ons, Howard, but talk to me about AI, because you know that I'm very concerned about it. So you can either say, Simon, you're blowing this out of context, because I have read the book by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, and I just see that. Because it's made of bits and pieces. It doesn't give a crap. And yeah, just that, and then we'll move on. If you can answer such a question about with just that, over to you, Howard.
What we know of as AI, what's presented to us, the governments and those in control, they're 20 years ahead. You know, we have now what they had in 2004. So it gives you an idea as you begin to see all the things that can be done, all the manipulation of everything, all the control mechanisms that's been in place for probably since Newsbenders. Like, that was a very honest presentation. But even now, just what we're seeing, the fact now that images are so good, the AI images are so good that you can't tell the difference. That's dangerous, because of course it means now historically, I don't doubt that in the next couple of years, we're going to see tons of, all of a sudden, this library has found these historical photographs of whatever, and look, it shows, it proves or whatever story we had. And of course, it's all going to be AI fakes, and nobody will be able to tell the difference. So you've got that problem. Another one that I talked about in one of my blogs recently is just for fun out there, people, go and like Google search for images like beautiful woman, beautiful brunette or something, and look at the top 40 images that come up. Half of them will be AI. Half of them will not even be real photographs for that search. And how does that make, like it's literally destroying femininity. The feminine has been, and women have been attacked for so long with the idea of a model, right? A model being someone who's not real, someone who is, you know, it's a simulated reality. So they've had to compete against these manufactured images, so to speak, but at least real people. Now the models are going to have to compete with AI, and they're never going to be able to do it. I would not be surprised if really short period of time, models are a thing of the past. That profession won't happen anymore. It won't take long for there to be no more actors, because why would you want to have a physical person and have to pay them when I could just create an AI generated image who costs nothing and will do exactly what I want to do with no problems. I don't have to feed them. I don't have to do anything. This is just on those levels, just on those scales. It's blowing our minds on that. Then when you add in the robotics, then when you add in the part that many people maybe don't think about with AI, and that is, why do they want all of your data? Why are they data mining every single thing about you? Why did they want you on Facebook to know every single friend, every single place you went, every single meal you ate? because they're building a simulated you in a giant simulation to test the world. Like if they want to do something next week, let's say we want to start a war against this country. Well, what they do is they fire up the simulation, and there's literally everyone in the world almost will be in the simulation nearly perfect. The you that's in that simulation, that whatever government agency runs, if they actually got into the point and said, Simon, we want to know if we gave you this particular sandwich, would you eat it? The simulation would know whether you would or you wouldn't. It's literally, it's almost can be that quality. So they can run 1 million or 10 million simulations of the expected war they'd want to have, see how the war plays out, see what goes, and then they can say, okay, this is the one that gave us the best outcome. This is how we're going to go forward with it. Literally, that's the real dangerous point of AI, is that the simulation model, because of the knowledge of every person in this place, is so good, because of the data mining, they can run near perfect simulations of not just on a global scale. They could run a simulation on, well, what if we did this in Manchester? How would the population react? They would probably have like an 85% correct response of how the population would react to anything. So that means what these governments are putting in place is not just something off the top of their head. It's not just some sort of crazy idea. It's an idea that they've run through their simulation millions of times and have come out to say, based on the end result we want, this is the best thing to put into place to get it. It's getting that detailed, and that's why it is so difficult for humans to react to anything, because we're reacting with just human logic and human understanding. They're working with 10 million simulations on a pretty good accuracy level of where we are. We're like 20 steps behind trying to catch up with what's going on here.
So they're building a tool for predictive purposes with all of the whistles and bells. So you have your captive models, i.e. your sim humans. It just basically in one box is a predictive tool. But I was talking to, or preaching, whichever way you want to. Some people say preaching. I think it was talking with, not to. I was talking with some colleagues at work of mine. I was saying my concerns for AI, and I would say a few years ago it would have been laughed at, but not this particular time last week. We were talking about AI, and I said I could see actually a time where this company would have AI assistants, so for rather than hire someone, you go and talk to a screen and it's, like a virtual assistant. And then a few years later, that assistant becomes the manager, and his cousin happens to be the doc booth. So Delta Oscar Charlie, DOC, the doc booth at your local supermarket. So because I think that, was it problem reaction solution? So if we struggle to have health service, it's more acceptable that you talk to a really nice young man at the doc booth, he's an AI and you wouldn't be able to tell. And the acceptance to society that this AI is now a doctor. Same for police and law enforcement. You ring them up because I'm tired of not getting through to the police, let's say, to report a crime, but you can instantly talk to your local friendly officer. And I think AI will be slid in that way. And anything, and I was talking to Jared Murphy the other week, anything that we can make, most technology can be turned for nefarious purposes. And I think that it's such a dangerous slippery slope, because I, for one, if it were responsibility given to me how we use this, I wouldn't trust myself. Therefore, I don't trust anybody with this technology, how it should be unrolled for humanity. Just saying.
Yeah, when the ones at the top are not using this to help you in any way, shape, or form, to me, it gives another impetus to just say, I'm done with this place. I'm done with this crazy reality, and I'm going home. I'm just going back where I come from.
No, okay then. Let's start again. Sorry. Let's. Could we now turn our attention briefly to your work on the high strangeness of Rennes Le Chateau? I think I might have pronounced that right or wrong, whichever. This is, of course, a massive subject, but could you briefly again give us an overview of why you dedicated so much time into your investigation?
For those who don't know, it's the story that kind of came to fame out of Henry Lincoln from some documentaries that he did in the 1970s and his book Holy Blood, Holy Grail. That's where it kind of got. But he and all of those originators are very strange, but it's a French story. It comes out of French researchers before that, who all have a strange story themselves, of a priest in the late 1880s in a small town of Rennes Le Chateau who seemingly found a bunch of very strange symbolic parchments and ideas and wound up becoming unbelievably rich, building massive stuff, putting in all sorts of occult symbolism. And the story tends to now have become told through things like the Da Vinci Code, that it's all about a bloodline of Jesus and whatnot. But the story interested me right at the beginning, and I totally I saw the Jesus bloodline story. I got into this in like the 1980s when I first read it. The bloodline story, that's a lie. That's an obvious misdirection. I didn't think about it much until maybe 20 years ago or so, and I looked into it again, and I began now with my having done a lot of research into alchemy and Hermeticism, and began to now look at the links of the Cathars of that period, who of course link completely with Exit the Cave, the Knights Templar, everything else that's going on in southern France. I saw this giant interconnected web, and that this story from the late 1880s, 1890s links to all of that. And I put together a giant research package, which became, I don't know, right? It's like a 12-part YouTube series now, trying to explain what might have gone on there. Because once you explore it, it becomes just nuts. Like every priest in every church in the whole southern France region has some really strange story. There's churches and buildings that get blown up with dynamite, statues that get their heads chopped off. I mean, it's so bizarre. And it starts to link to, is simplified, is the Jesus story perhaps somehow real, but having nothing to do with the Middle East, having nothing to do with supposed Jerusalem, Holy Land, that could this story have taken place in southern France? And therefore, that would describe everything that came after, with what the Cathars knew or didn't know, what the Knights Templar really were doing, why the Church of Rome needed to go in and first kill off all the Cathars, then kill off all the Knights Templar, that we're dealing with the unraveling of the real New Testament story, of the real New Testament history, and that all of it is locked into the landscape. And so I put that together of like half of my research. I've still got a second half of research that's just been sitting in a giant folder, because I don't want to write it into a book until I've done a full on the ground experience in southern France. And if the world doesn't blow up, if World War III by some bizarre chance doesn't explode by like August, September, then I'm going down this year, and I'm going to finally finish the rest of the research in person. There's a lot of sites from not just Rennes Le Chateau and Rennes Le Bain, for those who know, but things like Montreal de Sauce. And there's a lot of very unique castles and caves and things that need to be explored firsthand. And only after I've done the exploration firsthand and had the experience of the energy and the experience of being there directly for long periods of time, for like 4 or 5 weeks, would I be able to come back and say, okay, I think I've got enough to write a book about it. But my guess is that it's linking, the story really links to the origins of what we know as the New Testament. And so because of that, to me, given the history of that book on our however long we think that book's been in existence, it's an important story.
Poor, as a church mouse, village priest who seemingly was able to, just a few short years after, conjure massive amounts of wealth and hold influence over very powerful people. Could you briefly touch on that one?
Berenger Saunier, who was a poor priest who came out of Esperanza, a city, a little town just near Rennes Le Chateau, has a very strange story of how he becomes the priest of this town. By the time, sort of 10 years after, and he's rebuilt the village, he's rebuilt the church, he's built towers, he's built equivalent of sacred geometrical layouts in the landscape. he's got what the equivalent today would be hundreds of millions of euros, and he's being visited by high-ranking elite members from the Habsburg monarchy, from as far away as the Tsar monarchy of Russia. They're all coming to this little town in the middle of southern France and having these gigantic interactions. The story links to so many places. Like, I found that it links to the story of Chartres Cathedral. It links to the story of King Arthur and the story of what the Knights of the Round Table really are. It links to all of the giant stone circles that are found all across mostly Europe. All of these things tie into the story of, and it becomes a problem of like, well, how does this poor priest become a guy who has access to the equivalent of hundreds of millions of euros and is able to build and do anything he wants? Generally, of course, he found gold. He found some buried treasure. It seems like, though, when you really dig into the story, the buried treasure he found is something, like I say, much more hermetic, much more alchemic, perhaps to the point of seeing something of having found out the truth of the creation. Now, I don't know if Saunier and the priests involved in this at this point, if they were good guys, you might say, trying to keep some sort of secret safe and promote something positive for humanity, or if they were people who came up with something and they were literally building a secondary trap into the trap. At this point, I'm not sure. Either one of those could be a correct answer, but without question, they stumbled upon something huge from the standpoint of knowledge and wisdom of our reality. And it's because of what they had that they were kind of left alone, is the best way to describe it, where it's kind of like, do whatever you want. And it wasn't until, I think it was 1916 or 1917 that Saunier was finally, you might say, squashed out by the new bishop of the area and died soon after. But the whole story, everything about it is just bizarre. Everything about it, like up to this moment, is bizarre. Why is it so useful and potentially interesting? Because it's not that long ago. It's only 120 years ago. We have actual documents. We have actual lists of things that were bought and sold. We have purchase orders. It's not like something 500 years ago. It's not like looking into the things that are linked to this, be it the paintings of Nicolas Poussin or things that are from so long ago. We don't have access to any. We have records. We have actual detailed stuff that can be studied. We have photographs. He made postcards. Interestingly, 33 postcards. No surprise, that number. We have these like what you might call tangible documents. So because of that, it makes the story very, very interesting because we have things we can examine. And yeah, that's on my to-do list coming up, is finishing this new Exit the Cave, like I say, over the next few months. And then I'm moving into, if the world is okay, going to southern France and finishing that work. If the world is really crazy, then I'm going to work on writing a memoir. So a lot of people have kind of wanted to know details of my story, how I got from being just a hockey player, comedian, to what I do now. And they felt that whole story would have value to be told. So one or the other, that's what I'll work on at the end of the year. And that's where I'm moving towards.
One of the, before we move on, Howard, to the last question I have, one of the parallels you mentioned when we talk about the World Fairs, we can see parallels in today's world. But one of the parallels I got from the story of Rennes Le Chateau was when you said he was being visited by royalty and powerful people at the time. I remember, I think it was about just before I think it was either before the Epstein thing. I think it was before the Jeffrey Epstein. I'm just using that as a time marker. When all the world leaders decided to go to Antarctica, even Neil Armstrong, who it became too much for him and he was hospitalized out there. So either what he saw, or it was just the temperature or whatever, but I don't think, walking there in swimming trunks, but that was a parallel. They all visited, there was a Greek Orthodox, head of the Greek Orthodox Church, Barack Obama, massive, people visiting, and the conspiracy theories, forget the conspiracy, the theories where they'd found something. And that was a parallel I would draw on that.
Yeah, that was also very strange. I remember
it was
very strange.
Yeah, it was very strange. Right. So I personally don't think that realistically there is a fix coming anytime soon for our society. It pains me to say it. I think the only way forward is for the individual to live in the present moment and do their best in this living and hope for it also. Before we wrap up today's show, Howard, from your perspective, how can we help ourselves?
That's the first question, or that's the first realization, I think. Once you begin to see that you can't fix the world is unfixable. It's built to be insane. And so trying to fix it is literally trying to fix a computer program that's built to do one thing. So what can we work with? Well, we can work with ourselves and our perception. We can work with how we interact with an insane reality, which is to become more sane. I think that's the number one thing, is study what true sanity is and begin to put that into your life. Find all the things that are false in your thinking or your belief structures or what you're doing, and let go of them. Let go of all those things and just focus on simplicity and sanity. And that includes being able to do that in small communities. You can make great changes with the area you live in or with people that you interact with in your area. So those are the first number one thing. Is it's about energy again. It's use your energy in a place where it, in a way that it can actually benefit you, not get sucked out by the system. Trying to fix the world will suck the system. Secondly, it's I know some people have had these real challenges of feeling alone in the last few years. They felt very disconnected because they have no one they can talk to. That just means there's no one you can talk to that you know of where you are. They're out there. These people exist. You just haven't bumped into them yet. It's one of the reasons I started my locals channel, which was to give people who, in this case, are interested in understanding exit the cave ideas and understanding the possibility of what leaving the matrix might be, to give them a place where they can actually discuss things together and have someone else that they can talk to and not feel crazy. I'm not saying you should come join my group, of course. It'd be great if you did. I would love to see more people there. But it's find ways to put a post on a forum that sounds like it has interesting ideas to you. Make a comment on certain videos somewhere that, with the idea to see, is there ways that you can connect with other people? It might not be in person to start with. It might have to be through the internet or phone calls, but just finding one or two people that they don't have to agree with you 100%. Maybe they agree 50% with where you guys are. That's a great starting point. And now you don't feel alone. And you feel that you have someone that you can share with. Humans generally have a need to share and discuss and converse and have other people that they can talk to. And one of the things I really enjoy about doing the interview process I've now been doing over the 4 years, I've met a lot of really tremendous people. Now, Simon is one of the few that we kind of continue to talk with beyond interviews, that we every once in a while catch up and see how we're doing. But there's a lot of others that I've met out there that are just great people. Like people I would love to sit down and have coffee with and just spend time with. And I'm really fortunate to have bumped into them just because they asked me to come on an interview. And I found out, wow, what a great guy. This is someone I'd really like to keep talking to. And it's just a reminder that they're there. It becomes a question of finding ways to bump into them, you might say. But beyond that, that's my number one suggestion. Focus on being sane in an insane reality. It doesn't matter what reality does. It matters how balanced, how stable, and how clear your perception can be. If you're working on those three things, you've got a 90% head start of the rest of the human population.
Sound advice, Howard. I appreciate that. That's us at the top of the hour. And again, I've really enjoyed our conversation here today and greatly thank you for the time you've given us. Before we wrap up, though, could you inform my listeners where they can learn more about your work, the other books you've written, and any and all upcoming events that we should know about?
Yeah, I guess the easiest place to start with is just popping by my website, howdymickoski.com. I'm assuming Simon will put it in the description below. From there, you could find my locals channel, which is where I still have a YouTube channel. There's stuff from years that are there, but anything new, anything that I'm doing now goes onto a locals channel. I prefer to have conversation happening with people who really want to have conversation. So pretty much everything's either on locals or a blog on my website. The books, which are things that he's mentioned here, also includes Falling for Truth. I've got a hockey history book, also in the 1800s, very strange story of the origin of professional North American sports of the late 1800s, which ties into all of the strangeness. So you can always go to a place like Amazon and put my name in, and you can at least get an overview as well of the books, just like you can on my website. And then obviously you wouldn't have to buy any of them there. If you wish to get some, they're available everywhere. I've also got a new German translation that's just come out of Exit the Cave. That's just starting to get into German bookstores now. Spanish and French translation of that book are coming out later this month. And like I say, Exit the Cave 2 is coming up from there. Beyond that, I'm just sitting, getting comfortable to get my crop planted, get the wood cut, get everything that's needed to get going forward, because this might be a very challenging. 2023 turned out to be a fairly easy year if you didn't live in Gaza. It turned out to be a fairly easy year to generally get through. I don't think 2024 is going to be as smooth. It's good to be mentally and physically prepared for it now. If it turns out to be a smooth year, bonus, great. Happy to hear about it. But it might not be. And so, beyond that, that's where you can go and check out my stuff. And as also the website has a link of all the interviews I've done of the last 2 or 3 years. You can go and listen to those if you're interested. And I guess that's the update.
Howard Micoski, thank you.
Cheers.
And that was the Howdy Micoski catch-up interview. I'll state that for those of you that have heard Howard and have accompanied his research at the relative beginning up till now, then this show was a welcome recap or return to some really interesting material that it certainly has value reminding ourselves of. And for those of you who haven't known of Howard up until this episode here today, then it's an appetizer, and I highly recommend reading Howard's book and go on to his YouTube channel and start at the very beginning. It's all timeless and puzzle pieces relevant, and I believe you'll be very glad you did. We covered a lot of subject matter, and I found it all damn interesting, affirming and worrisome, all wrapped up in a high strangeness that seemed to have floated around this particular episode. And yes, I did bring up the whole AI thing again. It's absolutely part of the whole picture, a piece that cannot and should not be ignored. If a society can do terrible things and create horrific acts of wickedness, then the computer programmer's mantra of rubbish in, therefore rubbish out is definitely something to consider. Ask yourself, what would that AI brainchild of its less than perfect societal parents potentially turn out like? The word terrifying springs to mind. Anyway, enough of that, methinks. You get the idea, I'm sure. Again, my thanks go to Howard for the time he gave us today, and my thanks to you also, my dear listeners, for attending this cast. I put the relevant links below for that crazy BBC production entitled Newsbenders. Click on the link and be prepared to have one of those no f***ing way moments. And also check out Howard's website. Just click on the link and this will take you to Howard's books, blogs, latest podcasts, episodes, and much, much more. There is also another link which I have included, and it's a link to Fix the World. This link will take you to Hope and Tivan's excellent and information-filled website, and also the products they themselves create that protect the user from harmful radiation from our phones and their masks. Believe me, in my personal experience in having used them myself, I can tell you that these products absolutely help dispel negativity in lots of ways. Again, if you haven't listened to my episode with them entitled Fix the World, then please check it out, as I know you'll be very glad you did. Let's wrap up then. You can find the Simon Laurie King podcast at our website, theslkpodcast.com, and all the usual platforms such as Universim, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, etc. If you enjoyed the episode, give it a like and subscribe also if you be so kind. Leave a comment below or send the show an email, theslkpodcast@gmail.com. But either way, please, keep them kind. And so, my friends, it's time for me to go. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and certainly not afraid. Bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real. And always keeping it groovy.